So my name's Taylor Pearson. I'm primarily an author. I write business books. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I heard about this thing called Bitcoin. And at the time, it didn't make any sense to me. And like many people, I ignored it. And then kind of kept reading a little bit about it more and more. And then probably like 2015, 2016, late, sometime in that period, it sort of clicked for me. This whole idea of decentralized or distributed trust. And there were all these problems I saw globally and like with businesses and things I was working with that it seemed like blockchain was like a potentially really elegant solution to. So that was kind of my like red pill moment, if you will. And and it just got deeper and deeper. I would sort of say I synthesize different ideas. So, things start to come into the zeitgeist, if you will, how we talk about business, how we think about business, how we think about, at an abstract level, how we think about how systems work, and try and condense those into something that is a comprehensible framework. So my interest was primarily in how blockchain deals with sort of the future of work, if you will. That if you think about over the course of the 20th century, we had like centralizing technologies. So the multinational corporation, the way nation states were set up is, you had this ability for the first time to transact globally, right? Multinational corporations in the 20th century were basically the first organizations, maybe you go back to like the British East India Company, they could all of a sudden engage in like truly global commerce. And the benefits of that were enormous. But there were also lots of downsides to having these kind of like centralized structures, both in terms of, people were sort of subordinated to the top of the pyramid and a lot of people got kind of squished on the bottom. And there's a lot less kind of flexibility and mobility for individuals as producers. So it was great as consumers. If you think about now versus 100 years ago, the amount of like consumer choice we have, the number of products in the market, how cheap those products are, the availability is really incredible. When you think about now versus 1950, how much better people's lives are as producers or how they contribute, it's about the same. There hasn't been a lot of innovation on that side of things. Could we get the same benefits as consumers of this huge global commerce, while also having potentially a better situation as producers, where you don't have kind of these centralized hierarchical organizations, but you have what end up being flatter, what I like to call kind of like Hollywood model. You imagine how, Hollywood, you have all these kind of free agent types that come together and make a movie and then kind of disperse. So kind of this coming together and dispersing around different projects. That's the promise of blockchain, right? Which is that you can retain the benefits of kind of global trade, multinational corporations, the huge economic gains that have been made over the last 100 years. In terms of like, GDP per capita, all these measures have gone up, life expectancy, all these things have gone up tremendously. Can you retain those benefits or even improve on them? But also, allow for some more ability for individuals to express themselves and to have, a greater degree of choice in terms of what they're doing for work and how they spend their time. There's a book from the 1950s called The Organization Man. It's sort of like a sociology book about what it was like to work in a big organization. And basically, the gist is, if you worked for one of these large organizations, it made a lot of sense. If it's 1950, your parents were maybe farmers in a small rural county, you had the opportunity to move into a city, you had the opportunity to participate in global commerce, right? All of a sudden, you living in Nashville, Tennessee or whatever, can work with this large corporation that has the benefits of working all over the globe. And quality of life expectancy, you look at the increase in income from like 1930 to 1980 for kind of the average middle class American. It was huge. And one of the things that happened is individuals shaped themselves to fit the corporation. I mean, this was the logical thing to do, right? You have these tremendous benefits you can get if you can fit into this corporate hierarchy. And so individuals sort of naturally shape themselves to fit the corporation. And so I think what we're starting to see now is, with the emergence of blockchain and even the internet, like these kind of like decentralized, more distributed systems, individuals aren't having to do that anymore to be effective in the economy, and even it's sort of counterproductive, right? That in order to to fitting in the corporation, the whole notion of fitting in of conformity, that makes sense, right? You need the whole corporation to weld together. It's very hard to dissent. You can't fork the corporation, right? There's no way you can, if you're running a newspaper, you can't just fork the newspaper and take half the editorial staff and half the printing presses and half the distribution facilities and yada yada. It's really hard. There's all this corporate infrastructure, whereas with the blockchain it's a lot easier to fork, right? It's non-trivial, there's tooling and there's wallets and exchanges and all these things, but compared to trying to fork Procter and Gamble or fork Facebook, it's a lot easier. And Facebook obviously doesn't want you to fork it because they have this database, all their data they've collected, and that's their competitive advantage. They don't want to give it to anyone. In sort of like the ugly side, if you will, right, is that in the same way people become sort of loyal adherents to their corporation and they worship their corporation or their nation state or whatever, we start to see a little bit of the emergence of that with blockchains, right? If you go on Reddit and you look at slash Ethereum, everyone trashes Bitcoin. If you look at slash Bitcoin, everyone trashes Ethereum. But I think the optimistic take is, well, it's not that hard to switch, right? It's a lot easier to switch. It's a lot easier to change your Bitcoin for Ethereum, or change your if you're building a decentralized application, switch it from building on top of Ethereum to building on top of something else than it is to change your whole life. Change Procter and Gamble to a whole new entity. So this idea of you can kind of facilitate dissent, right? People have some more individual choice. And then you can almost imagine, if you think about these sites like Upwork, TopTool, something kind of decentralized, or not really decentralized, but just marketplaces, right? You could imagine, at some point in the future that someone's going to wake up and they're going to log onto their decentralized Upwork account, whatever that is called, and they're going to be tokenized rewards for different tasks they can do. And it's not I don't work for this company or that company. You have this very liquid market around work, which is one of the least liquid markets in the world right now. The job market is very, very illiquid and very, very inefficient. It's very how do you know? Is there a way to see all the other positions you could possibly be working at? It's all, the reason headhunters get paid so much money, they get paid 20% of first year salaries, because it's really hard to make these matches. It's really hard to find these places. And so, I think the blockchain could potentially bring a lot of liquidity to the job market. You start from the premise that humans are fundamentally tribal creatures, that in some way that's kind of deeply woven into our DNA. This gets expressed through different isms, right? So, capitalism, people identify as capitalists, or people identify as part of some company they work with or some organization they belong to, or their nation state. I'm an American, or I'm an Australian, or I'm a Korean, or whatever it is. I think the blockchain version of that is protocolism. So, you log on to Reddit now, and all the major protocols have their own subreddit, and often what that devolves into, right, is everyone trashing everyone else. That everyone on Ethereum talks about how Bitcoin is useless, and you can't even, it's not even Turing complete, and yada yada yada. And everyone on Bitcoin trashes Ethereum. That they have so many fewer nodes running, and the network's not secure, and these idiots, they're putting this money in this complete crap protocol, and every other protocol has their adherents. So I think that we're starting to see that emergence of tribalism in the blockchain space, and I think in a lot of ways it's stronger because of how how abstract and how strong the myths are around blockchain. That unlike if you're valuing a public company or something with a PE ratio, where you could say, well, the PE ratio on this company is insanely high, and maybe that doesn't make sense. There's not really anything that the blockchain is tethered to. It's all a story. It's all a myth. And there's a book called *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, and he talks about this concept of myths, right? You think about what is a corporation but a myth. If the factory disappears, does the corporation go away? No. If the management staff turns over, does the corporation go away? No, you could replace all the employees, you could replace all the facilities, you could replace all the marketing campaigns, you could replace the whole thing, and yet the corporation kind of continues to persist, right? It's just it's a myth that we've all agreed upon, which exists. And so, blockchains build upon, protocols built on this same premise. They are myths which we've all agreed upon, and so I think one of the natural things that arises out is protocolism. Well, I mean, there's kind of like the standard mythological structure, right? If you look at any religion or any great story, they all sort of have the same thing. So, I mean, Satoshi is Bitcoin Jesus, right? That's what people call him, and that's his role in the myth. And so I think, in some ways, like Satoshi being anonymous probably makes the myth more valuable, right? Because it adds this air of unknown and mystique and like almost godliness, or something supernatural, right? That this unknown anonymous person popped out of the internet and released this protocol into the world, which is now growing and which he has no stake in. And I think the fact that he's people monitor his wallets, he's never moved any of the Bitcoin, and that he's kind of like all left there. I think that probably adds to the appeal, right? That like this person thought this thing was so important that the world had to have it. This thing is so valuable and this thing is so important that I'm not even going to take any of my $3 billion off the table. I'm just going to let it go. And so I think that builds like this very strong, religious, mythological story. I mean, I think the exciting thing about ICOs, like whenever people talk about the internet, we talk about the gatekeepers are dead and the middlemen are dead. And the truth is, like, that didn't play out quite as much as people thought in like the mid to late 90s, right? We just have new gatekeepers now. Like, it used to be AT&T, and now it's Facebook and Amazon and Google. And the same thing with fundraising models for company, right? The venture capitalists are the gatekeepers, right? There's a relatively small group of people who control all the access to capital, and that's the bottleneck you got to go through. And so you have to fit yourself into what the venture capitalists want. And so the promise behind ICOs is you decentralize, you get rid of this gatekeeper in terms of what it takes to start a company. That if you have an idea, you can go out to everyone, and you can pitch them that idea, and if people want to invest and take part in it, then all of a sudden they can. Of course, there's also the thing, it's not just companies, it's protocols. Beyond just like being able to fund companies, now all of a sudden we have a mechanism to be able to fund protocols. And then I think from the investing side, if you talk to anyone in venture capital or angel investing, what's the hardest part about your business? What's the most important thing? The answer is always deal flow, right? What's really hard is it's a really illiquid and inefficient market. And if you're one of the privileged few or you have the inside track, you get all the best deals, and if you don't, you're not. There's an old boys club, right? And so I think the exciting thing about ICOs, right, is you could get rid of that old boys club, right? That all of a sudden it goes from who you know is what matters a lot to your judgment is kind of this centralizing, is the most important thing. That if everyone is seeing the same thing, everyone sees all the same ICOs pop up on the same site, everyone has the same opportunity to invest at the same terms, and the question is, who has better judgment? So sort of funding mechanism, and then also sort of like a meritocracy of investing.